Right, welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Rufai Seni.
I'm Adesuwa Omoran.
And I'm Shaiton Atigari. Welcome back, Adesuwa.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Brimming in New York.
Great to be back.
Lovely. All right, and hey, welcome back on the occasion of Nigeria's 59th independence anniversary celebration held on the 1st of October 2019. President Muhammadu Buhari gave the Independence Day speech, which highlighted three main areas his administration is focused on.
Indeed. Well, apart from reiterating the need to keep the country united, he also vowed to continuously secure the lives and property of the citizens, continue to fight corruption and restore good governance, as well as accelerating sustainable and inclusive economic growth. However, irrespective of the positive view of the president, some Nigerians are concerned about the slow pace of the country's economic growth, constant internal security challenges, and the battle between the rule of law and national interest.
Joining us this morning to dissect President Muhammadu Buhari's Independence Day speech are Emmanuel Dania, Chairman of Alliance for New Nigeria, and from our Abuja studios, Sesugh Akume, public policy enthusiast and spokesman for Abundant Nigeria Renewal Party, ANRP.
And from our Abuja studios, we'll be joined by Mr. Akume, who is a public policy enthusiast and spokesperson for Abundant Nigeria Renewal Party. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. The president's speech on Independence Day was about 25 minutes. Let me start with you, Mr. Emmanuel Dania here. Was there a hit or miss? What was missing as the chairman of a political party yourself? What do you think was missing in that speech? Did it make it for you?
I think to give credit to the president for the first time in all the speeches that he's made, this is one of the speeches that he's made the best delivery. I won't even think that he probably wrote that speech himself or he was in control of it to an extent. However, like I mentioned earlier, that I feel that every government has the best of intent, and I believe that this president has the best of intent at heart for Nigeria. The question has always been, how do you implement these things that you talk about? And I think that's where the crux of the issue is. And also the tone says a lot. When you speak about what you want to do for a nation, there's something about a body language. It's different from what your intent is and your body language is. And that's something that I don't know what it is, but whoever's around the president has not helped him in this particular regard. Because he always comes out not like the man who truly has the true interest of the country at heart. I've had the privilege of sitting down with him sometime in 2015, and I know his heart is to do right. The question is, how do you carry that out? And every president of Nigeria, I believe at some point when they came into power, they have the best intent of heart to do right for Nigeria. But the question is, the body language is always sent to Nigerians that they don't trust what it is that they're saying.
We also have somebody in Abuja, Sesugh Akume, public affairs enthusiast. If you're there, I'd just like to bring you to this conversation by saying, was that the same read you had from this speech? The president, like Emmanuel Dania was saying, he has good intentions, he's got a good heart, but to be able to execute is a big problem because of his body language. And you know, when you say body language, you might say something, but if your body...
Well, for me, I completely disagree with my colleague on the panel, Mr. Emmanuel. I disagree completely. The speech did not strike any chord for me. As a matter of fact, there are so many inconsistencies in the body of the speech itself. Right from the fourth paragraph or so to the end, there are so many inconsistencies. There's so many falsehoods and so many of such. So it didn't strike any balance, anything for me. I was rather a bit put off, to be candid. And I also feel a bit put off balance anytime I'm told that leaders have the good intentions, they have good things in their hearts. I've heard that all my life. But Nigeria, for the while I've been alive, has always been going down the drain. It hasn't been improving much. It is rather, I always keep hearing about good intentions. I'm tired of good intentions. And also, like he said, on the part I agree is that, yes, indeed, the body language, the conviction, there's no conviction in the speech. And as usual, because it was full of inconsistencies, that is what happened. I can point so many of the inconsistencies. When the president spoke about economic growth, inclusive economic growth, that's certainly not true. And then when you're lambasting the last administration that the economy grew at just at 8%, oil contributed 8% to the economy. I'm wondering, so during the past 4 years or so, how well did we do? Before then, the economy was growing at 7.5%. We thought that was low, that was slow. Now it's growing at less than 2%. Between 2011 and 2014, oil theft was 60.2 million barrels of crude oil stolen. This year alone, NNPC is announcing that between January and June, 20 million barrels were stolen. That's like 110 barrels, 1,000 barrels of crude oil a day stolen. That's more than what 60% of oil-producing countries do not produce up to that in a day. That's what is stolen in Nigeria. So when we're talking about security and fixing the economy and doing that, the facts on the ground and what the president said do not tally at all in so many areas. When we talk about the rule of law, when we talk about security, and we got the IG's report, he himself said between January and March, thousands of Nigerians were killed. That's just what is on the record, and we're not talking about the ones that are not on the record. And that was unprecedented. So it is not true. Most of the things the president said are not quite exact the way they are. And so as long as we're not saying what is accurate and what is there, it does not strike any chord. The first independence speech of 1960, Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa is said that wrote the speech himself, and his delivery was excellent. I don't think since then we've had any president or head of government or head of state do such for us. And that is just a metaphor for how Nigeria has been. The way Nigeria was at the level we were 59 years ago, I'm sad to say that in all the areas that matter the most, we have always been performing low. We're always going down. So it's not a good one for me, I would say.
That's your take over there, Shaita.
Okay, so speaking of inconsistencies, I'm putting this out to the two of you. Now, one thing that struck a chord among Nigerians was definitely the fact where he spoke about civil citizens' engagement. And I would like to quote what the president said. He said, "I reiterate my call for all to exercise restraint, tolerance, and mutual respect in airing their grievances and frustrations." However, it's an irony because we are a few weeks into this Sowore debate, and it's interesting the timing of it because, you know, he has come out and said this. However, you can see that the government is intolerant of any form of expression or human rights. How would you react to this?
I think there are two sides to this. And I'd mentioned that in earlier one of the interviews that I had, that yes, as a nation, we have to be careful how we use the tool in social media. We must ensure that whatever messages we're sending out there are messages that unite the nation and not divisive. Anybody who follows social media, you'd know that Nigeria is so divided from the comments that you hear on that. So a country should be, or security should take that seriously and see how we can manage that process. However, I did mention that the body language of the government is important. Even in the speech itself, the tone of the speech itself was very military and not democratic, saying the very decisive measures are going to be taken. This is a democratic system, okay? They're processing in which and I feel that when you make a statement like that, you know, people should help you deliver it in a very democratic manner so that people receive that. The Sowore's case, I think, again, like before, I've seen this government come out with certain things that are good, and then they shoot themselves in the foot again. They're their own worst enemy as far as I'm concerned here. They don't even need an opposition like PDP at this point in time because they themselves are the ones, they're not selling their agenda properly. They're not pushing their agenda properly. And I think that they should show level of tolerance in whatever it is the Nigerian people are. The attitude of government constantly suppressing the people is not what we want to see. 59 years, I think that we should be able to see things differently. If the people trust you, you understand, you should be able to have a government that can deliver on them. But it just shows to you that if you're doing so well, the people should be very comfortable with you. And there's a disconnect between the government and the people. I saw that at the elections. I saw that through all that process. There's a big disconnect between the people and government. And that's what I keep saying, that yes, like my friend had said in Abuja, yes, that, you know, the president's body language very clearly does not show precisely what his intent is. And the people around government somehow are completely disconnected from the grassroots people. But we must always remember that the purpose for why we're in government is for the people. And the concerns of the people must be taken into consideration. Security it's one thing that you must deliver to in any society. It is one of the things the president said he was going to take care of when he came in was security. And I hate to say this because every time we have these conversations around security, the economy, all of these things, it's futile. It's futile simply because we are not dealing with what is the most important aspect or the issue in Nigeria. We have a fundamental issue, and that issue is the rule of law. Until Nigerians begin, or a government will take the bull by the horn to say, listen, this is the constitution of this country, and no one is above this constitution. Okay. If the president speaks, you understand, the president overrules.
We're still going to bundle all of that. You just want to react in Abuja, Akume?
Yes, please. I have so many reactions to that. I don't agree with my colleague in certain things he said. I agree on some key things, but again, I don't agree. It is not true that the government, the regime in power now, and the party are not projecting what they're up to, what they have in mind. I think they're clearly doing what they have in mind. They don't have any other thing in mind apart from what they're doing. So that's why there is always a disconnect, because there's a difference between what they say they're saying and what they actually mean and what they're doing. That's why the speech is full of inconsistencies. That's why they can say one thing and say another thing. When you talk about tolerance, who is supposed to be tolerant of who? Right across where I'm sitting here at the Hilton is Unity Fountain. Unity Fountain is supposed to be a public space. Right there, when you go, there's a detachment of police officers there preventing people from going there to express themselves. Who is talking tolerance about who here? We're talking about Shaware, who is a prisoner of conscience. He and Mandate, they're prisoners of conscience. They're in prison. What are they doing in jail? When you talk about the rule of law, the court has already said that allow him to go home. You refuse to allow him to go home. And then you're sitting here and telling me about the rule of law, about good governance, about tolerance. What tolerance are we talking about? Is it not just this week when Onuma was arrested by the SSS for simply wearing a shirt? The shirt bore the title of his book, We're All Biafrans. What are we talking about? That we shouldn't use metaphors in Nigerian public space any longer? He's not a Biafran, he's a Nigerian. He carries a Nigerian passport. The book was talking about something deeper. Are we saying that the SS didn't know about that? And so we don't want people to use certain words. We don't want people to use, even if it's symbolic hyperboles. You don't want me to use the word revolution. If you don't suffer a crisis of legitimacy, why? It doesn't matter that I said revolution. Why is it important? Why does it matter? And so the intolerance is from the regime itself, as can be seen even in the tone of their language. They don't know how to communicate. When we talk about unity, who brought unity? Am I the one who spoke about 95% versus 5%? How was that undone? When we talk about Nigeria's use of social media, we have a national orientation agency. What is their plan on social media? How do they use it? I was at an event where a director at the National Orientation Agency was present, and he was asked, what is your plan on using social media to unite Nigerians and to orient us towards nationhood? They didn't have any plan. So what are we talking about here? How does the government itself do, and how does its own party and the people they recruit to insult everybody and pummel us and keep us quiet? How do they do it? Do they use civil language? Do they use objectivity to address issues? Of course not. So you can't be saying one thing and doing another, and then that's why for 59 years we're still a baby. For 59 years we're still talking about the same thing, national unity. Should we be talking about unity at 59 years? It's just like you're married for 59 years and you're talking about being united. Being united after 59 years of marriage? At 59 years, we're talking about things we should never be talking about. And it's because of this same thing. We say one thing, we mean another thing. We actually have one thing in mind, but because our speechwriter wrote something, we have to say it. It puts me off. Because, quite frankly, I think at 59 years, this is not what we should be talking about. And we can't continue this way and pretend that everything is fine. It is not fine at all.
The way forward, constitutional amendments, restructuring, to be or not to be.
We need all of those. We need all of those, but for now, we're not having any constitutional amendment anytime soon. Maybe not. We need a restructuring. in so many areas. We're probably not having that anytime soon. But in the meantime, there's so much that can be done. First and foremost, we need leaders who stay on telling us what is true, stay on being committed to what they say they're going to do. You don't tell us one thing and do another one. Just yesterday, there was a report released by NATI. NATI is the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. It's a government organ, by the way. It said that this Buhari regime diverted, those were their words, diverted 543 billion naira to INEC and the military. I'm wondering, the executive doesn't have the power of the purse. Who authorized using that money for that? Who appropriated it? This is corruption. So you cannot be practicing corruption and turn around and be lecturing us on something else. It does not work. As long as we continue with this mindset of saying one thing and meaning another, and not being committed to what we're saying, and not doing things the way we know we can't do them, we'll just be going around in circles. And that's why 59 years after, we're still going in circles. Before we went on the break, you asked the question about unity and that. What are we united towards? What is our goal? And what kind of language do our leaders use? What kind of language, what kind of symbols do they use? They're not uniting. When you talk about 5% and 97%, when you talk about so many people who voted and so it's not going to work. The president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is not just an office. It's not just a person. It's an idea. It's a transcendental idea. So the president is not male or female. He's not from the north or south or from the east or west or anywhere. He's not any of those. He's what symbolizes Nigeria. Right now, we don't have any of those. It doesn't show unity. It doesn't invoke a spirit of patriotism in us. That's what Mr. Daniel said earlier. The delivery of the thing didn't show any conviction. And because we're not convicted about what we're saying. And so as long as we don't get these steps correctly, we don't have people who are saying what they mean and they actually mean what they say and match it with actions, it's never going to work. In another 59 years, our children's children will sit on the same station analyzing the same thing. It's quite depressing. As long as we do not mean what we say and say what we mean. Right now, there's no sincerity of purpose. That's why the speech itself, of all the paragraphs, most of them are full of inconsistencies.
Okay. I think I want to put the cat among the pigeons, as they say now. We've talked about the fact that every leader has great intentions when it comes in. Tafawa Balewa had great intentions. Many other things happen along the line. And subsequent leaders in Nigeria. But the factor that keeps holding us back is the mental discipline, was what Bismarck Rewana called it, why we had it in Independence Day presentation. Some people will say personal, sectional, and self-interest. I think it was that interest that made Obafemi Awolowo quip and say Nigeria is just a geographical expression, because he knew that the interests, were way more than the unity of this country. A lot of people call to return to the days of regional governments. Regional government, some would argue, was the most divisive form of government, that each region of Nigeria had their own consular offices in the UK. Consular for Northern Nigeria, Eastern Nigeria. So it's all about our sectional and self-interest. When are we going to have the unity of purpose, devoid of sectional interest? Talking to you, Pastor Daniel.
Okay, let me just make this correct this impression. Every nation, every country in the world always would have, interests. Politics is about interest. Wherever in the world, it's all about interest. The question is, what do you set above? What is the thing that keeps the interest, for the better interest of the nation? Every developed nation in the world, it is all about the constitution of that nation. You see, Tafawa Balewa did well in his early days because people followed the rule of law at that time. The military regime that has come completely eroded, completely brought disregard to our constitution. And I will continue to make this point very clear. The biggest problem and the giant in Nigeria today is the religion of self. It is the biggest religion in Nigeria. It's taken over the Christian faith, the Islam faith. Everyone thinks about themselves first. And this is where the issue is. We have the best policies, but when it's time to implement, the problem is self comes into play, and that's the issue. And how do we deal with this? It goes back to what I was just saying earlier, the fact that the Constitution must be upheld. It must be respected at every stride. And government must show good example.
Well,
government
people will argue with you that Constitution is one of the biggest problems in this country. Section 162, we can go on and on and on and on like that.
But you see,
that even the Constitution was wobbly when the words "we the people" didn't write that Constitution. That's what a lot of people argue with you. 1979, amended in 1999, we the people didn't write that Constitution.
Look, I agree with the sentiments of many people concerning that Constitution. However, it is a Constitution. The first thing is respect that Constitution first. In the process of respecting that Constitution, you can start making amendments. We're not doing any. And that's why we have the problem that we have today. You know, my colleague was saying earlier about the elections of how monies were moved from X, Y amount of time. Now, the reason why all of this is happening is simply because nobody can enforce those rules. Everybody knows that whatever I do, there are no consequences to them. Because all it takes is that if someone who's senior in government somewhere, who's protecting somebody's interest, the police can't do anything. So two things I keep saying government must focus on all the time is that the law enforcement must be re-engineered. The judiciary system must be re-engineered. If we can put both institutions and put them in the right place, I think that people will continue to follow the rule of law and things will fall in place. The reason why we can't implement in Nigeria is because there are no consequences to our actions. And so we can sit down and continue to have these conversations about reforms in education, reforms in all of this, come up with all of these great policies. Nigerians have always been able to develop very fantastic policies. Ask yourself a simple question. Why has that policy not been able to get to the grassroots? It's there in the air. But implementation is where the issue is, and which goes back to what you're saying. For self-interest state, if I say, for instance, that a particular project would probably benefit the people of Taraba State, you know, and somebody's self-interest will move that from there and take it to Jigawa State or take it to, Enugu State. It's all self-interest. There has to be an overriding document where if you're designing an economic policy, design an economic policy for the nation over a period of time. Whether the government is PDP or APC, ANN, whatever it is, they must follow that blueprint. But what we have today is we don't have that. And again, it's simply because some people are above the Constitution. And this lacuna was brought upon Nigeria by the military regime. But we cannot continue to say what has happened in the past. We're saying, what do we do moving forward? Listening to the president's speech, you know, and one of the disappointing part of that speech was every time they make reference to the past government, please, Mr. President, please, I beg of you, the members of the APC, were also members in that particular government. Let us be very fair and very objective in what we do and very, very sincere. You know, it's just, Nigeria is giving you 8 years to run. Focus on the 8 years and let's see what you can deliver. That's the most important thing. Let's stop going back and forth on this. Let's just make sure that we can see the results of what you're doing. And for as long, and I keep saying it and I will maintain it, as long as your body language does not represent what is being said or being done, Nigeria would find it difficult believing or trusting in this government.
Well, Mr. Akume, let me bring you back into this conversation. I'm talking about moving forward. The president did say we cannot bring about change without changing our habits. He talks about being law-abiding. And I wonder what your opinion is. Do you think that the president himself has led by example?
But that's precisely what we're saying. And that's why, in my own view, the whole Independence Day speech was more of a charade. And that's the way it's been for me. Because the president, he's not even convicted about what he was saying. Probably because he didn't write the speech, he wasn't involved in the process, and so he was just reading what was presented to him to read. And that's what we've had all this while. No sincerity or purpose, and so that's why it was so. What was that? It seems to me like it's a parody or something. How can you be talking about the rule of law when you're breaking the law yourself? Because I just gave an example of what NATI reported. It's not as if I'm a whistleblower and I found it out. It's NATI, a government agency, transparency organ of the government, that said 543 billion was diverted to be spent unappropriated. That's not the first time. We know about $460 million dollars or so were paid to buy jets from the US without being appropriated for. So many cases of lawlessness. What are we talking about? We're talking about Sowore, who is still in captivity. Why is he in captivity in his own country? When the law says one thing and then you're doing the other. You're doing what you want to do. Look at what the Minister of Information said yesterday about introducing toll gates and tolls. And he said there's no law against creating tolls. But that's not true, because we have the Tax and Levies Act of 1998. And then you can jointly read it with Section 315 of our Constitution. It is not true that you can just wake up any day and set up a toll gate and start collecting money. It's not true. So when you flout the law to suit yourself, and then you turn around and mock us and tell us about rule of law, how does it make sense? That's why for 59 years we've been going round and round. It is not true that every president has good intentions. I'm sorry to say so. That's what we've been saying. That's what we've been told. And so we keep repeating those lines. It is not true. Some do not have good intentions. They only stay there for what my colleague, Mr. Daniel, said, the religion and then the cult of self. That's all it's all about. It's not about our collective interest. And as long as we do not put our collective interest above every other thing, it's going to affect us all. Last week, I wrote an article about the Kaduna-Abuja road as a metaphor. And essentially, my point is, as long as we do not work towards having a society that works for all of us, and we're thinking about me, myself, it's going to bite all of us. That road, for instance, was a terror to every other road user. Some people thought because they had convoys, they were protected. Now nobody's using the road any longer. Everybody's using the train. Everybody's running away. It's the same thing. As long as we don't put Nigeria above every other thing so that Nigeria is bigger than us, and as long as Nigeria prospers, all of us are going to prosper in it. It's not going to work for us at all.
But let's just quickly even segue into something that happened recently. The president is in South Africa, and the Nigerian flag, look at it, it's turned upside down.
Interestingly, President Muhammadu Buhari is on a 3-day visit to South Africa following the recent, this comes days after the recent attacks on foreigners there. Nigerians being evacuated. But this flag is what is getting attention today. Yeah. President Cyril Ramaphosa is supposed to be meeting with President Buhari today. But the position of that flag, if you can just get that flag again, is what has got people talking.
The position of that flag reflects the position of Nigeria as it stands at 59, upside down.
I wouldn't say that, but this flag is definitely not in the proper position.
Not in the proper position.
I mean, it's green, white, green. Yes, we do understand that, but the position, it's not horizontal, it's supposed to be vertical. It was intriguing to see this. I mean, the president is visited.
Yeah, I think
and this was a parade. This is a guard of parade for the president.
I think, but this should be on South Africa. I mean, since they are the host, these are things they should check. And they should, look properly at things like that, because this has generated a lot of reactions, in Nigeria. A lot of people are complaining. Some people that were saying the president shouldn't even be there in the first place because a lot of Nigerians were hurt in the xenophobic attacks in South Africa. And now you're saying this. What does this mean? What optics, would you deduce from this?
Again, if we're making reference to the flag, this is what I've been talking about. There are no consequences. Somebody should be responsible for this. Okay. And so we'll continue to have things like this when you don't have consequences. So, and this is the problem. Any society where there are no consequences, it's a lawless society. Nigeria is lawless. Whichever way we want to look at it, it's just a lawless society. And so I disagree with the view of most people saying that the visit is unwarranted. I think it's normal for the president to go to that country and to make clear what the position of Nigeria is. And I do hope that that's what he's going there to do, because I've said before that the reaction to the government when it happened, the xenophobic attack happened, was very, very poor. And it's sad to also think that it took a private citizen, to take the initiative, to use his office right, to bring Nigerians back from South Africa. This is something that government should take. You see, again, it goes back to that body language. If you care about the people, you shouldn't expect that. You should take that upon yourself to ensure that your citizens are protected. But there's such a disconnect. And that's why I agree with Sesugh from his speech that what you're saying and what you're doing is completely different. You know, you're saying one thing, but the people on the grassroots are not feeling what you're saying.
Well, Mr. Akume, I'm sure you want to react to this flag that we are seeing in South Africa today, but let me just ask you so that you answer all at once. A lot of people have said the reason why the paradigm hasn't shifted concerning socio-economic political affairs of Nigeria is because we are lacking the consistent leadership like we had in the likes of Awolowo, the Sultana. But here's the question. We blame so much on leadership. How about the people? Have we done enough in 59 years? Do you think that the Nigerian people have played their part? If you can respond to that, and if you would like to say something about the flag that we saw flying today in South Africa. Some people say that was not a Nigerian flag.
No, that's not the Nigerian flag. Based on the orientation it's flying, I can say that that's not the Nigerian flag. But just like Mr. Dania, my colleague, just said, we're just a lawless country. Let's leave it that way. You know, assuming, for instance, that you go to the hospital to see a doctor and what you're feeling is headache, and you say, well, you don't tell the doctor that you are feeling a headache. He could go ahead treating something else. When we accept that we are a lawless country and that everything is not well with us, then we can sit together and start addressing it. But as long as we keep having those sort of wishy-washy speeches, Independence Day speeches that say everything without saying anything in particular and saying what we don't mean and having lots of inconsistencies, that's what we're going to see. For goodness sake, when a president or whatever high official is to visit a place, they have advanced parties that go ahead of the places and put everybody through. How is it possible that we have Nigerian government presence and the president of Nigeria was visiting a country and that sort of travesty was allowed to happen? It shows how messed up everything is. That should be something we should rant about 1 or 2 days and then move on to other things. We're going to have more of such embarrassments because right now we're running on the spirit of error. As long as you're running on the spirit of error, we keep doing this kind of things, keep embarrassing ourselves everywhere we turn to, as long as we do not go back to our roots and correct that spirit of error. Right now, that's just a symptom and a consequence of what we are. We're just not doing well. If we like, we can learn a lesson from it. If we don't like, we can give all manner of excuses and divert and do all sort of obfuscations and move on like nothing happened. But if we like, we can see that there's something fundamentally wrong. How was it possible for such a thing to happen? And then we also have to have consequences. That's what happens when you're in a lawless society. When you're in a society where the president does what he likes, he respects the constitution or the law courts where it suits him, because he is above the law, and that's the culture, that's what we're going to get. You're always going to be embarrassing ourselves everywhere we turn, and that's it. In the last, my colleague, Mr. Daniel, spoke about the military abusing our systems and all of that. Yes, that's true, but we've had 20 years of continuous civil rule. Right now, we shouldn't be blaming anybody else. We should be blaming the kind of system we have. We run a kakistocracy government by the worst and least qualified people, and that has been Nigeria's been right from the outset. I'll give an example. One thing that characterizes a civil government, a democracy, for instance, is the National Assembly. What kind of National Assembly do we have now? It's not the military that set it up. It's not the military's fault that we have a National Assembly that is just a rubber stamp and just a lackey of the executive. The Senate President himself, the first speech by the President, that's on June 12th, Senator I.D. Gang from Plateau said at the Senate that let us look into, analyze the speech of the President. The Senate President said, no, we can't do that. Let it not be seen that we are antagonizing the President. For goodness sake, what is that? So right now, they've already put themselves in the place of being lackeys of the executive so that whatever they say, they're willing servants to obey that. Look at what he went to his home state in Yobe. He told the people that they will not fail Buhari. Those were his words. It's not the people. It's about Buhari. It's about their patronage system, about what favors them and works for them. As long as we keep on that trajectory, we're not going anywhere. So we keep messing ourselves up. The other side about the regional governments and the other things we spoke about, as long as we have this kind of rulers anywhere at any level, we're always going to be disunited. It's not as if when we had the northern region, western region, we didn't have issues within them and all of those. These are the issues that have been with us for the past 60 years. It's actually a shame. A time should have come when we'll stop the train and say, no, we can't continue this way any longer. We have to stop this and refocus and do things properly. How can we be 59 years and we're still talking about the same things babies should be talking about? It's quite a shame. It's quite embarrassing.
Now,
right. Yeah.
Do you want to? Okay, so Mr. Kwame, it's interesting for you to note all this. However, Mr. Dania had rightfully mentioned that two things that should be done is working on law enforcement and also the judiciary system, because we don't have any consequences. In your words, very quickly before we wrap up, what other ways are there for us to move forward in here? What would you bring to the table so that we're not having this conversation 59 years after this?
We need to have leaders at every level who know that their loyalty is to the Federal Republic of Nigeria and not to some politician. We have to put the collective interest above all. The president, for instance, has to know that he is not the law. There is a law that created the office that he's occupying. So he has to submit himself under the law. As long as that is not done, we'll keep having these embarrassments. And so all of us should be. The question you had asked me earlier about we the citizens, I think we Nigerian citizens, we've not been playing our role in the past years. We've gotten tired and because we've been pummeled, and so we got tired and we just sit back and complain and talk and that. I think that's precisely what our rulers want us to do. They want us to get tired of the whole thing and just leave them to do what they can. There's a role. We the citizens have a role to play. The people, that's demand and supply. We are the demand side. We should demand good governance. And insist that we get it. We should not get tired and allow people do whatever they want to do and get away with it because we're trying to survive. They put us in that mode, impoverished us.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kwame. I just want to give us your last words before we go.
I think again, it all falls down to justice. The people, the Nigerian people, are not getting justice. And if you don't get justice, you understand what happens is that you lose hope. What gives the country hope is justice. What a man, as a citizen in Nigeria, any citizen in the world has is justice. But clearly, one thing I want to be able to say very quickly is that, Mr. President, you must show that you're tolerant. Okay, and that's a good place to leave it. Hopefully we'll not be having this conversation next year, Independence Day. Thank you so much, Mr. Akume from our Abuja studios, and Mr. Emmanuel for being part of the show today.